Today, we will be discussing one of EVALSDGs guidance group insight number 10, which was done with EVALSDGs and EvalGender Plus community. For your record, today's dialogue will be recorded and the microphones will be muted for the first sessions of the dialogue. Then all the microphones for the breakout rooms, in addition for the Q&A section, will be unmuted. And as you know, we are in a dialogue, so we would like to make it interactive and not to make it from one side as a monologue. So we will encourage you to introduce yourselves through the chat box through Zoom platform. So if you're new for Zoom platform, we would like to guide you where you can find the chat box. If you're signing in through your laptops, next slide, please, Katinka. If you're signing in through your computers, then you can find the chat box as seen in the slide in the bottom. And if you're signing in through your mobiles, you can find the chat box through clicking on the three dots with the title more, and you can find the chat box. So please introduce yourselves for us, your names and from which country you're joining us today. Today's dialogue will be moderated by Ravi Ram. Ravi Ram is an evaluation and strategy professional with expertise in applying a gender, equity, and social inclusion lens to development evaluations. He is based in Nairobi and he contributes to the African Evaluation Association and the EVALSDGs guidance group. Ravi has co-edited the insight, which you can find those insights through our website, evalsdgs.org. Those insights are short documents that discuss different topics regarding evaluation and SDGs. So reach us through evalsdgs.org. Ravi, the floor is yours now.
Many thanks, Rowan.
You're most welcome.
Yes, quite a nice introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. I know it's morning for some, afternoon for some, and it's evening for a few of us. So I'd like to move us straight in because we have a very rich dialogue coming up. First, a very brief introduction to the two networks that are joined together to put together the evaluation insight on which we are basing our discussions today. EvalGender Plus is a group as part of the Eval Partners Group. It works to strengthen the demand, supply, and quality of equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations as an avenue to support accountability for gender equality commitments in the implementation of the SDGs. EvalGender Plus is a global multi-stakeholder partnership under Eval Partners. The agencies participating in EvalGender Plus are UN entities, multilateral banks, civil society organizations, academic institutions, and voluntary organizations for professional evaluation. Likewise, EvalSDGs was established by Eval Partners in response to the need to embed effective monitoring and evaluation in the SDGs. EvalSDGs is an evaluation partnership to inform, support, measure, and assess development efforts around the SDGs. As a network of interested and skilled policymakers, institutions, and practitioners who advocate for the evaluability of the performance indicators of the SDGs, EvalSDGs adds value to the evaluation sector and to the SDGs in their implementation and review. And with that, I'd like to introduce our two main speakers for today. First, we have Dr. Florence Ibam-Etta. She's a member of the African Evaluation Association, where she has served as the sixth president back in 2009 to 2012, and she's the current vice chair of the African Gender and Development Evaluators Network, AGDEN. Florence has also been active in 3 of the 5 global evaluation networks that were created back in Kathmandu in 2015, meaning EvalSDGs, EvalGender Plus, and EvalIndigenous. Since July 2020, Florence was elected in her position as co-vice chair of EvalSDGs. So very much welcome, Florence. And then from EvalGender Plus, we have Florencia Tatuaisian. Florencia is co-chair of EvalGender Plus and an evaluation specialist in the Independent Evaluation Service of UN Women. She has more than 15 years of evaluation experience with a focus on conducting gender-responsive thematic evaluations and managing national evaluation capacity development. She authored the Eval Partners Guidance on Evaluating the SDGs with a lens of no one left behind. Both Florence and Florencia are lead authors on the Evaluation Insight. That's Evaluation Insight number 10. And we will be putting the link into the chat box so that you can download that if you've not already read it. So with that, I would like us to turn now to, let's go straight into our poll. And Rowan, if you are ready, we can launch the poll. There we are. So I think all of you, you're now seeing the first question. How familiar are you with gender and equity responsive evaluations? And I see votes coming in right now. So we'll just give a few more minutes while we get to allow all of you to be able to give your responses there. Quite a few more responses coming in. I'm just going to allow another few more seconds. And thanks very much. I see Niesh has introduced himself from Bangalore, India. And I believe Aditi has just joined as well. So good evening to our participants from South Asia. All right, with this, I think it's time we can end the polling. And you should be able to see the results on the screen. Most of us have some experience, but do not see ourselves as experts. Some of us are experts, and then there's quite a few also who are not at all familiar or have heard of gender responsive evaluations and or don't have enough experience and want to see if they can get some more. So I think that's great right now. Can we go to the next one?
The next poll comes a little bit later.
All right. All right, so here we are. We have the question, what is gender responsive evaluation and why is it important for the SDGs? And as I mentioned, our two speakers today are going to be addressing this from the two different perspectives of EvalGender Plus and EvalSDGs. So I'd like to ask Florence first. Would you like to just say a few words on this point?
Thank you very much, Ravi. Shall we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So he asked, what is gender responsive monitoring and evaluation? Well, it is the intentional mixing, putting together. It is in that intersection where concepts, notions, ideas, standards, and norms from the major sections of knowledge, feminism, human rights, gender and development, are integrated into M&E for all development interventions. And the purpose is to increase their success, the success of the interventions, reduce inequalities, and transform gender plus relations. So we're saying relations that are gendered and other kinds of discriminations. That's why we have the notion of gender plus. And this comes from intersectionality. So gender responsive evaluation is intentional, It is the mixing of ideas from key areas of knowledge to improve and strengthen monitoring and evaluation of development interventions, policies, and programs. Next slide, please. So Gender Plus responsive evaluation is a journey. And this journey begins from the design stage, from the planning and design stage, continues in implementation, and also happens in evaluation. What this slide is showing you is that there should be a strong connection or arrow or movement from design to implementation to evaluation. That's the notion. So here we are as professionals of evaluation. We're in that big yellow ellipse there. But before we get there, other people who have other responsibilities should have taken notion and taken cognizance of doing the intentional integration at the design stage and at the monitoring of implementation. You will see that there's a very thin line coming out of evaluation and going back, or joining use and design. The idea is that whatever gender responsive evaluation results and reports and findings are should now be fed back through the use of those results into design, and the process and the journey continues. Next slide, please. Here we're just telling you what happens at each of those stages of the journey. At the design stage, what happens there is the analysis of gender plus situations, of cultures, norms, and practices, of who are the duty bearers, who are the right holders. That is the stage where all of those analyses are done so that you can take a gendered aware and gender informed and gender responsive design and implement it. At the implementation stage, what happens there is that you're tracking the gendered activities or the degree to which your activities are gendered, so you're not perpetuating discrimination and inequities, so that you can also track and monitor the results based on a gendered lens. At evaluation, which is where most of us in this space are particularly interested or located, the journey expects that you start from the TORs, at the TORs agenda, that the methods, the indicators, the analysis, and recommendations are all are gendered intentionally so that you can see the nature of the results. So you don't do it in the methods and forget the recommendations and all of that. At the end is that the use of the results is supposed to improve the quality, reduce inequality, and strengthen gender relations, especially of underserved, non-served populations and other kinds of groups that are discriminated against. Next slide, please. I now hand over to my colleague Florencia, who's going to deal with the second part of the question that Ravi asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence, and thank you, Ravi, and thank you everyone who has joined today for this exciting webinar. So yes, as you just heard from Florence, what is gender responsive evaluation? And now it's like, why is it important for the SDGs? And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the SDGs, with the Agenda 2030, a plan of action for the people, planet, prosperity. And what's important about this agenda is that it's people-centered and it's gender sensitive. One of the most important aspects of the agenda is really this idea of leaving no one behind. So we want the agenda, we want the goals to be reaching everyone, even the most marginalized populations, and even all those people that actually are not, do not have access to the same possibilities as others. So as you know, gender equality features very prominently in this agenda, and it's a cross-cutting feature across all the SDGs. And to really harness the potential of this agenda, the transformational potential of this agenda, we need an accountability framework. We need monitoring, we need evaluation, and we need these frameworks to be anchored into human rights and gender equality. Because as we heard from Florence, gender responsive evaluation is going to allow us to understand what are the inequities that are happening and that are going on in all the interventions that are there geared towards development. So evaluations that are gender responsive are going to offer insights in whether the policies that are there for achieving the SDGs are really achieving the SDGs with a gender equality perspective, are really achieving gender equality. Also, these gender responsive evaluations are so important for the SDGs because it will allow governments to understand actually to which degree the power relations have given reason to inequalities and discrimination. So actually these evaluations will provide the evidence that will actually help governments move towards changing anything in the policies and how they're making it to achieve gender equality. And of course, I think these evaluations are also very important because they are part also of a system. And this system is about the national evaluation systems that exist in every single country that actually are responsible for conducting evaluations. And if those systems are actually aware of the importance of gender responsive evaluation, then the way they're going to conduct those evaluations to achieve the SDGs are going to be geared towards leaving no one behind. So now over to you, Ravi, for your next question.
Sure, yes. Thank you both. I think that's a very good perspective from two different sides of Eval Partners about where are we with the SDGs and gender responsive evaluation, or where have we come so far? So I'd like to hear from both of you again. Where are we now? And I know for those of you who have just joined, we are looking at evaluation insight number 10. We will have the link in the chat box. You can download it if you don't already have it. We also encourage you to just introduce yourself briefly. You can give your name, the kind of role you have in evaluation, and where you're joining us from. Please do that in the chat box. Later in this webinar, we do want to open up and have a full dialogue. For now, we're hearing from our speakers. So I would like to then turn to both of you and those who have the evaluation insight. Take a look at the figure, the diagram that's provided. We're going to interrogate that just a little bit further. And maybe Florencia, would you like to take this forward first with an attempt to answer the question, where are we now?
So I think Florence will take the next.
Great.
Let's hear from Florence, yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Ravi, and thank you, Florencia. The interesting thing is Florencia had said just before Ravi posed this question, she had told us that there are 169, there are 17 goals, yeah, and 169 indicators. And we had said that gender responsive evaluation starts from the beginning, but at the point of evaluation, indicators are a major dimension of gender responsiveness of an intervention or indeed of the evaluation. So here we are posing the question, we're interrogating the SDGs themselves, the 17 goals, and trying to say, well, goals, how gender sensitive or gender responsive are you? And here we have the figure showing us, the first column shows us those goals that we consider to be gender responsive. And what does it mean? What it means is that those indicators, we're counting the number of indicators in those goals that are telling us the distinction or the differences between the different genders in relation to that particular goal. So there are 6 goals that from our assessment are gender responsive. And in the center, we have 4 goals that we call gender spurs. You see that in the gender responsive goals, we have five indicators out of 14, or 6 indicators, or 8 indicators, or all indicators, in fact, that are gender responsive. But when we come to the gender spurs goals, these are 4, goal 2, 10, 11, and 13. You can see them on the screen. They're 2, 1, 1, 3, out of a total of 13, 15, or 8. So we regard and label them. In fact, this is a UN Women labeling. These are gender spurs. And then the final column on the right is gender blind SDGs. Then these are 7 SDGs that completely have no indicators that reflect the gendered realities that we live in. So in a sense, what we're saying is it really the point that when we discuss water and sanitation, energy, industry, innovation, infrastructure, responsible consumption, life below water, life on land, and global partnerships, that there are no gendered realities and experiences that we need to take into consideration there? So as a group of people who are particularly committed to equality, equity, and the change of gendered relations in all facets of life, what are we going to do? What should we do? Next slide, please. Plus, of course, there are new realities. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. I think that's incredibly interesting. I mean, why do we have this asymmetry, right, among the SDGs? Why some of them do have these indicators with gender responsiveness in it, and others do not. So, some of the answers to that, there are some causes to that, right? And some of them is really because we know that there is no there is no good data. So not all the countries have data, accessible statistical data to understand, what are the indicators and to actually measure, those other SDGs that we have seen do not have gender-related indicators. It's also, I think, a failure to place gender at the center of macro level processes. So for example, when we talk about growth strategies, industry, innovation, I think there is still not enough information out there. There is still not enough analysis to actually put gender into those macro level processes, because we are talking about aggregated indicators, and then we cannot understand what is the human impact of, for example, those macro level processes, and then understand what does it mean for women, for girls, and for marginalized populations. But all this to say that actually gender responsive evaluation is what we need, because with gender responsive evaluation, we are actually able to understand, those SDGs goals that are more sparse and where they are lacking indicators related to gender. So only monitoring indicators will not take us anywhere. With gender responsive evaluation, we can go a step further. And all this to actually go into what is happening now during the pandemic. So we have all these SDGs, some of them are sparse, some of them, have indicators, but we're trying to achieve them. And now we're trying to achieve them within a pandemic. And so this is really very challenging. And we all know, and I think we are all very well aware that, the limited gains that were made are now rolled back. So the pandemic is deepening inequalities, is exposing vulnerabilities, and then, all this is being amplified. So just a lot of examples, and I'm sure you're all very aware about, the housework that has increased for women, for example, the levels of domestic violence that have increased during lockdowns as well. Also, we all know about, how the school closures have impacted girls the most, because there were less, the indicators were showing that girls are less prone to go to school. So with the pandemic, it becomes even more difficult, and they're perhaps called to be helping at home the most. So all of these actually is, putting us even further behind. And that's why with more gender responsive evaluations, we're going to be able to actually understand better where we are and actually move forward. Thank you. Over to you, Ravi, for the next question.
All right, yes, and just before we go to the next question, I'd like to thank both of you. Some really, really good insights. Florence was talking about how gender responsive evaluation applies gender inequity across the evaluation journey, and not simply embedded into a few evaluation questions. I think that's an important takeaway for those of you who are building up your experience in gender responsive and equity focused evaluations. And then Florencia was also talking to us about how it's very much people focused. We're not just looking to satisfy indicators, but we want to look at the power relations behind them. I think these are some real good takeaway points. Rowan, let's launch the second poll. And you can see over here now, we have a question for you. What does VNR stand for? And feel free to go, you're already starting to vote. That's great. So we'll allow you a bit of time to vote. Those of you who, again, have just joined, I can see we have people coming in from Canada, from India, from Malaysia, and from across Europe. So that's quite good. Please feel free to introduce yourself on the chat box. And as Hayat has mentioned in the chat, you can also introduce your questions here. We will be coming back to those as we open up for the wider discussion. So seeing a variety of responses coming in, I'm just going to allow a few more seconds for you. And feel free to keep on voting. All right. So we'll close the poll now in 3, 2, 1. And here we are. Let's share these results. You can see it on your screen now. So most of you are correct. 2/3 of you got it. A VNR is a voluntary national review. So well done that way. Others of you are getting I guess, more familiar with things. Those of you who suggested virtual network report, clearly you're living in the pandemic because we are all working virtually. And those of you working on valuing norms and rights, that's clearly a possibility, but that's not actually a VNR. A VNR is a voluntary national review. It's where member states in the United Nations have signed up to conduct their own, it's a review of where they are in terms of the SDGs. And there is a rolling calendar for those. You can find that on unsdgs.org. Civil society, including evaluators, do participate in those. And several governments involve evaluators, such as I can say South Africa is very strong on that. Kenya is also taking that on, and I believe Netherlands and Finland have also done a very good job. We'll hear a little bit more about other countries as well. Let's stop sharing these results. All right, so let's move ahead now. Like to hear, what have we learned about gender responsiveness in the VNRs? And that's where we had the poll, the voluntary national reviews for the SDGs. I think we've got 2 excellent speakers here. And are we hearing from Florence or Florencia next? I'd like one of you to step forward.
Yes, this is from me, from Florencia. So thank you, Ravi, again. And yes, now we're going into specifically the evaluation insights and what we have actually put together there, and the evidence from the gender and evaluation analysis of the voluntary national reviews. So this was a collaborative work. We have done it in 2018, also with IIED, and then in 2019. And so it was collaborative. And so lots of people from EvalGender Plus put together their work and efforts, and they actually start reviewing the VNRs using an analytical framework that we put together. The idea was really to understand, are these voluntary national reviews using gender evidence? Are they using gender evaluative evidence that comes from the gender aspects? So we really wanted to understand that, whether that was used. We really also wanted to understand the process and the governance of the VNR reviews, how gender equality was covered in these VNR reviews, whether it was using gender evaluative evidence, as I just said, and also the perspective from marginalized voices, as well as how the evaluation communities were involved in voluntary national reviews, and how we could strengthen this. So in these slides, you have a peek of our common findings and how, for example, we were trying to see where are they using the terminology, these VNRs, gender responsive, are they using, leaving no one behind? Are they really mentioning the degrees of violence against women? Then we were also looking at, the different platforms and, who are the ministries in every country that is actually informing the VNRs and is owning the VNRs in their countries, and are they talking to evaluation communities, for example, right? Then we were also looking at, are they really looking at the frameworks, the CEDAW framework, the Beijing Platform for Action? Are the national laws related to gender equality included in these VNRs to actually make the point that we are advancing or not? So we look at also at these 2 years, and so we could even compare whether we are just kind of advancing. And in a way we were. In 2019 we saw that there was more mentions of, for example, the frameworks of the strategies, and so there was more mention also of evaluation evidence coming out. However, still there were some things that were left behind, and one of them was, for example, how we are including the most marginalized groups. So, you know, these voluntary national reviews are coming from governments. So in a way, it's often called also a beauty contest in the sense that governments want to show off the best they do. So what our analysis, and that's why important to analyze these things, because we're kind of shadowing, you know, what's the reality behind. And we were seeing that, for example, yeah, they're mentioning, you know, the most marginalized groups, mostly children and women, which are very much groups that are often left behind. But what about the elderly? What about the LGBTQ communities, disabled people, indigenous people? So these groups were often not mentioned. Next slide, please. At the same time, we were looking at the methods that they were using to actually do the VNRs, and mainly it's the statistical analysis that prevails. As I said before, it's really monitoring indicators that tell us a lot. But if we don't have the data, how are we going to get that? So sometimes we need to, you know, an evaluation can help us with through different methodologies. We do interviews, you know, we do surveys, and we collect primary data again. So these are more or less the common findings. And so I think this was very important to help us understand where we are in terms of the VNRs. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Florencia. We talked about how different governments are engaging in evaluating the SDGs through their VNRs. Florence is going to take us in depth on Nigeria and then also touch on a few other countries. Florence.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Florencia, you did a good job of telling us about the VNRs, and that is really the basis, the meat of the insight that we are talking about. And here we're looking a bit to the future. So we're saying at the time the VNRs are a normal process that happens, as Ravi had said, every July countries come and they report at the high level political forum about what they're doing and what the state of their implementation is and how they're monitoring and stuff like that. So the analysis of the VNRs is very, very valuable. What I see is that is in terms of our implementation, in terms of our gender responsive journey, we have come from design to implementation. The VNRs are telling us, giving us snapshots and pictures of where countries are in that implementation space. Here we are saying when the countries and their implementation of SDGs matures or almost close to there, some countries decide to evaluate. And as you see in one of the common findings, there are plans for evaluation. Some of those countries indicate in their VNRs their evaluation plans. Here, I'm just giving a little bit of a snapshot of 3 countries, one snapshot of 1 country and 3 samples, sites, URLs for other countries. Nigeria earlier on decided it wanted to do an evaluation of more than 2, in fact, they were hoping to do 3. And this process commenced in 2019, and believe it or not, it is still ongoing. And they finally decided to do evaluation of 2 SDGs, SDG 3, good health and well-being, and SDG 4, quality education. As we speak, the completion is yet to happen. But the scope was in the first 4 years, looking at the pictures in the country of the existing plans, existing strategies, and what has happened based on the signed up document, meaning the Agenda 2030. So what we find in Nigeria is that COVID was a major disruptor. And as we speak, there is what we have in the public domain, which is still incomplete, is a secondary data analysis report. This report is based on, it's called secondary because it's based on data that is existing, data that the statistical department and ministries of health and education and agencies that are related to those 2 ministries have generated. So we have here a situation where sometimes the data is not very available. Florencia had mentioned that. And so there's a dependence on national health surveys and similar data sets that are available in the country level. Some of the situation, some of the difficulty, like suggested in the report, is that some of the states, Nigeria has 36 states, Some of the states do not have adequate and up-to-date or even disaggregated data, especially in these two areas of schooling and health provision. But the primary data collection is happening in 6 states, which they have labeled on a continuum of poor, medium, and good. So hopefully, by the time the result is over and the primary data comes in, we would have a picture of what it looks like. But because it's health and education, we see that the indicators, they have a sizable, good number of indicators that they are going to report on, that the report is mentioning. Things like provision and access to health, who's accessing health, which gender is accessing health, who's finishing education, what about the quality of the number of years of education, who's going on from one level of education to the other in terms with a gender lens. So we do have that. These are traditional areas where we will get gendered results to show us. But the most valuable part of this is probably answering the question or giving the pictures of why. The next slide tells us, just mentions the fact that Finland and Costa Rica have also completed evaluations of SDGs. In Finland's case, it was basically looking at how its own national strategies is advancing or is enhancing or integrating the SDGs and how well it's done. And for us, Finland's perhaps the most valuable part of one of the more valuable parts of the Finland evaluation is its methodology. It was highly participatory, extensive consultations and lots of people joining up. What we would like to see from a gendered perspective or a gender responsive community is how seriously does this methodology bring up and involve the voices of traditionally marginalized groups or even the newly marginalized emergent groups. So for us, we're saying these evaluations are valuable to show us what is happening, especially on the fringes of people, of those groups that are traditionally discriminated, so that we can increase or improve equity, social equity, and reduce inequality. So the question here for us is, we're hopeful, the two communities, EvalGender Plus and EvalSDGs, are hoping that we do the same kinds of analysis that we have done with the VNRs, with evaluations, because it is absolutely useful to find out. When we move from the implementation space to the space of looking at outcomes, then we need to see whether or not the outcomes are replicating the discriminations of the past or heading towards a more gendered, a more equitable future. My question to us all here, in fact, not just mine, both of us, Florencia and myself, are saying to us, wherever we sit, as in our own national and individual locations in our countries, in our organizations, in wherever we find ourselves, we should ask ourselves, how are we implicated in this evaluation or in the SDGs evaluations? How can we take our passion and our commitment to equity and reduction of inequality into these spaces? So let us all, in a sense, think about the evaluation stage. You all are familiar, probably mostly familiar with the fact that evaluations, especially the SDG implementation and their evaluations, are centered on governments. Governments have the primary responsibility and a lot of the control of that process, but we are all implicated in development action. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you very, very much, Florence and Florencia. Some really, really good insights about the overall approach and then specifics about how countries have engaged and then are continuing to engage. I very much like the approach that you're describing for the subnational work that's taking place in Nigeria. We see a couple of suggestions over here, and I'm wondering, how would we like to discuss these right now before we get into our breakout groups? And as we're looking at these right now, I'd like to thank two of our participants have already started putting questions into the chat box. We very much like those. We've logged those, and we'll be coming back to those. We'll be
Okay,
getting
let
to
me.
breakout room soon, and we'll also have another quick poll just before we get into the breakout rooms. But Florence, let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. I guess I asked the question, what shall we do prematurely? But here is a slide that talks about what shall we do. And we're starting from the document that we're discussing today. And that document gives us these 4 directions in terms of what to do. So the first one is just saying, most of this, because the government is at the center of the action in terms of the SDGs, it's just such a big role it has, is that it is important that government actors out the government actually commit and try and improve or increase gender responsive evaluative thinking in the processes. It is important. And we as experts, and the fact that the poll showed that there's quite a number of us that are experts, we should support this process of embedding gender responsive evaluative thinking wherever we are, wherever we find ourselves. And we also believe that governments need to invest resources in improving the skills and expertise. Because if the skills and expertise are not available, the evaluative thinking isn't going to show up anywhere in documentation, in committees, in actions. But the resources need to be invested. And again, this is a government responsibility. However, we have government partners, we have development partners who support government and support non-government actors. So in a sense, resources should be directed there. The third one is the fact that sometimes other actors outside of government are in a sense not invited. That's why the Finland example is so good. We need to have government understand that gender machineries, these are things that come from a long way off. The gender machineries are an early structural innovation that most governments and nation states created in response to the clamor for gender equality. And they're still there, most of them are still there, but they're very, 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 very under-resourced. Voluntary organization for professional evaluators, that is us, EVALSDG, AEA, AFREA, EvalGender Plus. These are all spaces and locations where committed action needs to happen. But they are outside, often outside of the government space and sphere. So governments need to actively invite them and give them a role, and not just an observer role, an active participatory role. Finally, governments need to build broad and strong partnerships in support of gender responsive evaluation. And I just want to conclude that it starts with all of us. Like I said in the last slide, we need to commit ourselves to take action. But I'm sure you all have suggestions as to what we should do, as to what you can do, where you're sitting in your organizations right now. The thing is to start. I have a colleague, my friend, my husband's senior colleague says, just do it. So let's just do it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Florence. Those closing remarks lead us to the third poll. And you can see on the screen, we're using Mentimeter. And there's a link there. Thank you, Hayat. Hayat has just added it to the chat box. If you click on that link, you'll be able to then give your own inputs about who is most responsible for integrating gender into evaluation of the SDGs. This will generate a composite of answers from all of us. Looking forward to seeing what comes up. So if you click on that link, let's get started with that. You can do it from your mobile phone or from your web browser, either way. And let's see what comes up now. Thanks, Katinka. Now you can see on the screen also, you can see the answers coming in right now. If you aren't able to use that link, you can go to www.menti.com and enter in the 8-digit code that's on the top of our screen right now. So quite a lot of responses coming in. Let's keep this moving. And I can see just a few responses coming in the chat box, some of them coming directly to me, emphasizing all stakeholders. And thanks to Zurjan from Tajikistan for that. Also evaluators, and we see that very clearly actually here, VOPEs and NGOs, evaluation commissioners. Where else? We had another one. We've got evaluators. Then we can see a lot of the work about partners, all stakeholders, evaluators. Clearly we have a strong role and we're accepting that. And I think that would include every researcher as well. Government is very much parts of this as well. We see national government, we see the government, we see government in general. Government is also one of the key actors in terms of commissioning evaluations. So we can see their role there as well. All right then. I think we're getting a very good sense, and this is addressing the kind of question that Florence and Florencia were also talking about. So we're seeing a real consensus that we as evaluators take on a responsibility for doing this integration, but we're not doing it alone. We're doing it with government in general, plus certain ministries. We're doing it with the VOPEs. We're doing it with other public sector actors and other civil society actors. So I think this is, I can see a consensus coming together in our responses here. So as we move ahead, I want us to be looking at now to questions and answers in our breakout rooms. And there's going to be a few key questions that we are going to be looking at. We will have 5 breakout rooms, and we'll be showing those to you on the screen in just a moment. The breakout rooms will take a few minutes to go through and answer questions. What we have for you are not facilitators, we have rapporteurs for you. And the rapporteurs will be prepared to be able to consolidate the thinking that you have and bring it back into the plenary, because we will have very little time before we dive into discussions. We want to hear quick responses from the breakout rooms. But rest assured that even if the nuances aren't coming out in the quick responses, those will be recorded in the report, because we do want to take all the ideas here forward. Some key questions for you. How does, or how can your organization integrate gender into evaluation of the SDGs? And a second question is going to be, what kind of restrictions do you or your organization face in making that integration, integrating gender into evaluation of the SDGs? And there are subcomponents of those questions as well. Each of the rapporteurs will be able to help you get into that in a much more detailed fashion. So Roxana, are we ready now to start allocating people to different breakout rooms? And I see that's happening. Great. Okay, so we'll be reconvening back here in a few minutes. Looking forward to seeing you. Welcome back, everybody. Hi, I hope you've enjoyed the session that you had in the breakout rooms. I can say from our breakout room, we were not finished, but I think that opens up a scope for us we've started a discussion, we can build on it now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of the rapporteurs from each of the breakout rooms to just give us 1 or 2 quick highlights, and it's more to simulate discussion. It's not to cover everything that you have. I am going to restrict you to 30 seconds, so don't let yourself get cut off. Shall we start with Sonal? Sonal, you're there already, yes?
So I think we had very rich discussions, and a lot of it was that if there are some restrictions to incorporating the gender lens, it's often because of staff time. The advocacy and the value for gender analysis needs to be understood. And of course, integrating gender in M&E is very, very critical, but a lot of technical assistance is required. And I think there is some change happening now with more investments, because who we had was somebody who was working in the private sector coming in towards for more of investments where are more girl intentional or gender intentional. So I think that could be briefly what was discussed.
Fantastic, Sonal. Thanks so much. That's within 30 seconds. That's great. So who should we call on next? How about Isha?
Okay, our group had a very good discussion. Very rich. Somebody from, there was a lot from financial regulation. They said that they were in the process of gender inclusion in the financial regulation, something that's very good. This is private sector as well as the funding organizations. Then we also had a person from Research for Development. They are actually having a gender action plan, which is something that is going to be very interested to know about it. And also IIED is the focal point. They were think tank of the SDGs in 2018 and 2019. They are very much into the SDG implication action plans and think tank organization, and agenda also in part of it. Actually, what we were talking about, the whole thing is that they are going on.
You now. You've gone well past 30 seconds. I think it was just a good flavor, and then we will get into the discussion afterwards. I'm seeing that Yakta has added some comments from breakout room 3, which is quite nice. We've got something there. Do you want to add anything very, very briefly? Perhaps Edda, you might contribute there as well.
Yes, let me just contribute. I haven't read the chat. We talked about resources, especially in terms of what you find out when you do the gender responsive evaluation. The missing link is the resources, the implementing. So, and we also talked about once there are resources, maybe from the donor, the sustainability of these resources sometimes is an issue.
Right.
And then, yeah,
one last point.
Yeah, the need of champions to champion gender in organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Edda. That's great. Hyatt, do you want to give the highlights from room 4?
So I was with Edda. So Edda covered, I think, covered it very well. But the idea is to have gender integrated intentionally into the planning, and as well to have the resources to take it seriously, so that whenever we come up with recommendation, we can apply what evaluation comes with. Yeah.
Thank you, Hyatt. That's great. Thank you both. From the last room, Katinka, you can give some quick highlights.
Yes, thank you. Our group has actually taken 2 steps back. One, to actually ask again, whose responsibility is it? The implementation of the SDGs, and of course, and the evaluation of the SDGs. And we said that, of course, there's SDG 17 on partnerships, so it also includes the private sector and any other sector, and also, for example, WTO and all those working on trade. And Florencia shared with us that, of course, there are also cities now, and not just governments and national level who are doing VNRs, but also on city level. Then the second step back we did was the question, when should we include gender? And one of the colleagues mentioned that we should start, as Florence has mentioned earlier, really from the design to the implementation, and then, of course, also in the evaluation, but really start at the very beginning. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Katinka. And thank you all. I think these are some very good points coming out, very much reflecting what Florence and Florencia had talked to us about earlier in their presentations. We are running a little bit ahead of time, which is fantastic, because that means that we can have a bit of discussion in this open plenary. I know that there are some good points that have come out from the discussions, but I would like to first turn to Moa. You had put the first question into the chat, and maybe you'd like to expand on that just a bit. So can we ask Moa to be able to speak?
Sorry, yeah. So my question was about the gender responsive methodology. This is something that I struggle with when I provide advice on how to make evaluations more gender sensitive. But then I got this reply about the UN Women's guide, right, for gender responsive evaluations. But it would also be great to hear from experienced evaluators on how to apply gender responsive methodologies in evaluations. Thanks.
Fantastic. Yes, a request for cross learning. I think that's very welcome. Let me ask people to just put a few key points into the chat in response to Moa's question. And then if we could do this, I'd like to turn to Eric. You had a question that you posed on the chat box before the breakout room. And that was very much related to the contribution of 80 million vaccine doses from the US to COVAX, and to what extent were SDG indicators taken into account in allocating those resources. You've also brought up some interesting points in the breakout room. So over to you, Eric.
Yeah, I guess that's just basically my question. I was asking if anybody on this working group had an answer to that question.
All right, so it's the larger question is, to what extent have the SDGs been factors in allocating resources under COVID, right, and the COVID response? So these are two very good points. While we're getting some responses on these, let's hear from others. I know that in the very quick 30-second reporting back, we didn't cover all of the richness of discussions in the breakout rooms. So if you would like, you could raise your hand, just click on reactions in your Zoom window, and you can raise your hand, and then we can open up for you to be able to intervene. And please do continue to speak on the chat.
I just wanted to very briefly, can I go, Ravi? This is Florence.
Yes.
I just very briefly wanted to go, to respond to Moa's question. I know that what we've given to you are long documents, and sometimes, you don't have it. We just want a quick response. I like to say, keep it simple. KISS is my motto. Keep it simple. So the point about advice for making actions or interventions or programs gender responsive is that you start from the very beginning and be intentional and ask the questions. We say that there are 4 principles. You must start off with an analysis, a gender plus analysis of what you're doing or your program. Make sure you take the cultural and policy and legal implications of the background into consideration. This is design and planning. Make sure you identify, of course, you would identify who you're working with, the program, what we call in the human rights-based language, the bearers, and of course, you are working directly, what you call beneficiaries are your rights holders. That's at the planning stage. You have to take all of that into consideration. And those dimensions that you have identified will now go into your monitoring. When you get to the evaluation stage, you start with all of the steps of the evaluation: tools, methods, indicators, analysis, and recommendations must also be gender sensitive. So simply put, if you're concentrating on the evaluation, you must make sure all the steps of the evaluation are reflecting a gendered position, meaning your indicators, your questions, your methods. And there are specific methods that are particularly helpful that are responsive to gender equality. These are participatory, empowerment, and collaborative methods. Thank you.
That's great, Florence, thanks. I think we're all gonna come away remembering that you emphasized what you started at the beginning, at the design stage. Moa, does that help answer some of your question?
Yes, it for sure does. Yeah, thank you so much, Florence, for that extensive answer. Thanks, that's great.
Great, okay. Florencia, I see that you have your hand up, but before we go to you, can we turn to Nushaf?
Hi, yeah, that's me. Hi.
We hear you, yes.
Okay, so that's me. Right, so I just wanted to just follow up on one of the questions that was in the breakout room, which was on how to integrating gender in SDG evaluation moving forward once we start the post-pandemic recovery. And I will just want to offer the insight that we're facing right now from our members, which is the financial regulators mentioned just now, was that because it's been such an economic hit across many countries in the global south, the gender agenda is a bit harder to pursue sometimes, because from their perspective, everybody was affected, which then has implications on resources. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thanks so much. Yes, we have a good dialogue going right now. Feel free to intervene, even if
Ravi, I need to make a comment now.
1 second, Isha. I promised Florencia that she would be next.
Thank you, Ravi. I just wanted to build up on Florence's response to MOA in terms of the different approaches and the different ways to do gender responsive evaluation. And I share this extensive document, which you will find different ways. But I think the most usual way, as Florence was saying, is to incorporate a question. So when you have your evaluation criteria, actually you incorporate a new criteria, which is human rights and gender equality. And within that criteria, you have specific questions that are addressing, what are the implications in terms of gender equality of the intervention that you are assessing, right? So that's the most usual way. That's, we have been doing that for a very long time. We even have advocated, on the typical, the OECD DAC criteria, relevance, coherence, effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability, to have that criteria there. But we haven't succeeded, so there's more work to do. So we can, but you can always adapt your criteria, have that criteria there, or mainstream questions across all your criteria, right? And then when you do your analysis, for example, if you're doing contribution analysis and you have your table, right, where you kind of first elaborate on all the changes that are found by the evaluations. And so across, you have the factors, you have, other factors, and then you always can have a column on what are the gender and human rights implications. So then when you're, understanding, okay, these are the changes that happen because of the intervention. And then, what does it mean for gender equality? So you go a step further analyzing that. So that's like a very kind of the most simple way. But then in this document, you're going to find, other ways of doing it, which, are, for example, you have a scale, right? You have the gender responsive, gender effectiveness scale. And so then you kind of, you can actually order your changes or, the results based on, where are they on that scale, for example, right? And then you have also these quadrants, right? So is the change at the individual level, at the systemic level? So then, and then in your evaluation, you produce an analysis of that. So that actually gives, and you're going to understand what are the implications in that sense. But of course, it's also good to innovate, right? I mean, I think, you can read all these and then come out with a new way of actually approaching it that you will, kind of, see another perspective of how change is happening, right? And we've seen this a lot, like, there's one evaluation where they used, a framework from, IFPRI related to agricultural research, and then they kind of readapted it because, for understanding the empowerment of rural women in Kyrgyzstan. So that was a joint evaluation. And so, that's also up to the evaluator to then adapt it based on what the intervention is about, right? So yeah, just to give you a few other ideas there. Thank you.
That's excellent, Florencia.
Thank you so much, Florencia. That's really helpful. Thanks.
Isha, you're coming up next.
I just want to add something. Recently, I was reviewing 2 evaluation reports. This is the experience I'm telling you. Please, when they say gender, mostly they were indicating the girl and the women. But the gender comes with a lot of other sexual orientations, LGBT and other transgender, so on. So those evaluation reports are not indicating any information about those communities. So I just want to tell you all that when you say gender, goes as a whole, not as a women and child, because that will give a lesser impact to the programs. There are certain programs like disability programs, social protection programs. They were not indicating much about the other communities of the gender partners. So I think that has to be little addressed properly. That's what I want to tell you all.
Thanks, Isha. Yeah. Hopefully,
and this conversation, Ravi is the only man here, am I right?
No. We've got several.
We have to make sure that it has a balanced approach. Okay, because today is very important, that part.
Yeah. So very good point, Isha. Gender is not just for one gender; it's for everybody. I think Florencia's point very much underlining what Florence has said also. We need to be looking at it from the beginning. And if it's worthwhile, I'll just share a quick thing that I do when I get a gender blind set of evaluation questions or terms of reference. I simply add in sub-questions and I say, to what extent has gender been factored into, whether it's the design, whether it's the outcomes, that kind of thing. You can tailor the question appropriately, but that's just a good way of framing things in your mind, and you hand it back to the commissioner. They're often surprised and a little bit embarrassed that they didn't think of it themselves. So it's just a good technique to take on. I like Florencia's points also, and I think I'm also going to be experimenting with some of the gender scales and giving it as part of the evaluation reports, even when it's not asked for. I think that's a very good point. We are coming to the end right now, but I would like to see just a few more hands. We've had a very rich dialogue. And let's see, if I can also, I'm seeing Mac's point here, depending on the nature of the program, very much. And thanks, Xavi. That's a very good point. Let me pick on something that came up in our small breakout room, which was, oh, and Florence, you've got something. Let me pause my points and let's turn to Florence.
There was a question in the. I'm sorry. I know you're harvesting the questions, but the question that talked about the most. And I'm sorry. I should have taken. The name of the person who asked this. It says the most known restriction is that we see sometimes the lack of willingness to integrate gender. I thought that I should bring that to the fore, so we can at least talk about this. Yeah. I don't know if I have a point here, but this is a reality. This is resistance. This is basically the kind of resistance that is overboard, that is everywhere, and it's something to be conscious about and to be intentional about doing it. So how shall we? Let's respond to this. Think about it for a second or two.
That's a great idea, Florence.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
It comes to the second question: what are the structural barriers for our integrating gender? It's not just that we are pushing it into the evaluation because we're aware, because we want to make sure that our evaluation is more appropriate than what was originally conceived. But what are the other kind of structural barriers? And let's hear from others.
Can I try 3 seconds?
Take
Ravi?
us forward, Florence. Yes, please.
This is basically sharing an example of a review we did, of a study we did. We were asked to look at in one country, and look at the national system for evaluation and how gender responsive it was. We called it a diagnostic. And what we found out was that there are 3 different levels. Analytically, we had a 3-level, what we call an ecosystem level: the macro level, the meso level, and the micro level. The macro level is where the national strategies and laws and customs and great big things inhabit. At the macro level in this country, they were all very, very gender responsive and gender plus responsive for disabilities, for positions and situations that are far off and on the periphery of development. But then this is national laws and constitution. There was even a Bill of Rights for gender and gender plus equality. And there are commissions and agencies that are there. So at that level, very positive. You come down to the meso level, which is like the ministry and agency level, it fizzles out. So there's no connection to that top level, which is very positive. And so in ministries, there are no plans to be gender responsive. Even the commissions don't know how to work with ministries to help them do that. And then you come down to the project level or individual project or program level, that is even worse. So the people in those programs that are the TORs, people are generating terms of reference for evaluation or reviews or assessments, are not even gender responsive. So this whole link, the vertical link and the ecosystem in nation spaces about the national, which is positive, dissipates. So that's something that we have to, in a sense, help. It's important to remove this resistance because of the lack of understanding that even your own country, your own constitution says this. Thank you. Sorry, over.
Very true, Florence, very true. We are going to be heading into our closing of this webinar very soon. Eda Kanini will lead us in that part. Just before we go into the closing, any last comments, any reactions to what Florence has brought forward in terms of that resistance to integrating?
I like the people who don't make any comments at all to open their voices. There are so many people here. Mac is there. I can see Mariam. Please give your comments or something so we can hear yours. The new people. on, guys, you can say something.
Sure.
Okay, yes, Mariam.
No, I just wanted to say it's been really great, and thank you for leading the discussion. But I didn't have anything very substantial, so Mac can go ahead.
Thanks. I'm quiet also because my mic is a bit cranky at the point on this particular laptop. But I think to me it's always quite interesting how, like Ravi was saying, we usually you come across evaluations where you have to consciously force people to put in gender responsive variables and questions. And so to me, most of the time in the case of Saudi parliaments, I've seen that gender responsiveness is one key thing that is being integrated into the work. Basically also because of the nature of the work, because they're looking at key populations in some of the programs, which is now coming up strongly, and the vulnerable groups, and then gender also, is considered as one of the key variables to look at. So it's quite interesting for me how in some countries they look at it well, and then you have to force people to look at it. So I think that is one important thing when you're talking about gender responsiveness. And it's always at the design stage where somebody had to consciously check whether this is being integrated or included. As to how big it goes on the macro level is another thing. But I think when we do it at the micro level, it might then rise up to the macro also. So thanks, and I'm glad that I've been part of these wonderful discussions.
Thank you very much, Yavi. As we now turn to our closing, I'm going to ask everybody just put on your video, if you don't mind, for just a few moments. It'll be good for us to have a sense as to who we are as we start closing up. Edda, can I hand over to you right now and you can wrap us up? Where are we going next?
Yes, thank you very much, Ravi. Let me try and put on my video too.
Can take a photo too.
Yes, yes. Seeing a lot of more videos popping up. Please do go on video. And fantastic. Okay, Edda.
Great. I hope you can see me and hear me. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can, Edda.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I give my vote of thanks, let me just make our call to action. One is to commit, to advocate, and to get involved. To commit to take action for gender responsive evaluation of SDGs. To advocate for gender responsive evaluation of SDGs whenever you can, wherever you are, as we have had, take that initiative. And also to get involved with structures and organizations involved in gender responsive evaluations. Such organizations are like EVALGender Plus, which we have seen here, AGDEN, and also other VOPEs and associations in your own country and globally. So now to my vote of thanks. So on behalf of the EVALSDG and EVALGender Plus team, I really cannot mention you all, but let me extend our hearty vote of thanks to our distinguished speakers, Florence and Florencia, for gracing this dialogue and sharing with us the insights on transforming M&E and achieving SDG, for achieving SDG through gender integration. And really this goes also to other authors of the EVALSDG Insights, Sonas, Velana, Hayat, Isha, Ravi, and also the other organizers, Rawan. I really can't mention all of you, but please accept our sincere thanks. A big thank you also to Ravi for being an excellent moderator and also for hosting us. We cannot really take this for granted. Now, a lot of work went into preparation of this dialogue and the insight, and the team worked tirelessly, day and night, meetings, virtually, informally and formally. And this indeed has echoed the words of Nelson Mandela that really encouraged me. Everyone can rise above circumstances and achieve success if they are dedicated and passionate about what they do. So thank you, team, for all this work. And also, we thank the GEI for conceiving, and also Claire for conceiving this idea of bringing up the gLOCAL, which is an annual event. Last but not least, it's to you, our participants. I convey our deep sense of appreciation because of your commitment, because of your support, because of being so vibrant and being so involved. You made this dialogue very, very successful. Without you, we could not have had this dialogue. Therefore, I still want to remind all of us as we go, as Florence said, it starts with me and you. Let us commit, let us advocate, and let us get involved. Otherwise, thank you, and have a nice time wherever you are. God bless. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Edith. Thanks to
Thank you
all
so
of
much,
us.
everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Some very
Thanks so much.
new faces here, new voices. Looking forward to having you join. Hayat has put some of the links into the chat box, so feel free to click on those and get in touch. There's emails there as well, and you can also reach out via the announcement. Thank you all, and have a very good day wherever you are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe. Thank you. Yeah.